Welcome to the Jeff and Alex podcast. I am Jeff Hilimire, and with my friend Alex Gonzalez, we explore topics that help you be your best self. And we also get to chat with some great guests. So join us now on the Jeff and Alex podcast. All right. Well, Alex Gonzalez, how are you doing today?
Excellent, Jeff. How are you?
I'm doing great. So let me set the stage here. You and I are embarking on a new podcast series, something that we've talked about for quite some time.
Yep.
As it evolves, one of the things we talked about was there's some people that will come to it because they know you. There's some people that will come to it because they know me, and then maybe somebody finds out about it that doesn't even know who the heck either of us are. So
that's what we hope.
That's right. So what I want to do today is get to know you a little bit better, both for people joining that want to learn your story, but also, honestly, there's some things I want to know about you.
Well, we hopefully still be doing a podcast after this.
Yeah, there you go.
I'm looking forward to this. Yeah.
But for real, like we've known each other for years and years. But
could you believe it's been over a decade?
Has it really?
Yeah, if I think about it, it's been over a decade because I met you shortly after I got to Atlanta and joined Equifax and joined the Marketing Roundtable. So once again, Dr. Ken Bernhardt being the connector. And so hopefully we could, continue that momentum that Ken has had with us. But yeah, it's been over 10 years.
Wow. Yeah. And obviously we, from the beginning, hit it off and have just become friends more than, business colleagues. But
absolutely.
But so I'm excited about this series we're doing. But
and a sneak preview to those watching, I'll be interviewing Jeff too. So
yeah,
it keeps us balanced.
Mine will be much shorter. I'm certain of that. All right. So let me start with this. Where were you born?
Havana, Cuba.
All right. And what brought your family to Atlanta?
Yeah. So Atlanta has a much longer story, but to connect her from Havana. So my family came over. We came over when I was 11 months old, and we were part of the freedom flights. This was 1970. So between like 68, 71 or something of the freedom flights, which is a lottery system to get in, very coveted to get in. So we flew over. My mom would say it was on Delta. Over to Miami, and then from there we moved to Denver, Colorado, the Cuban hotbed, of the country. I still so don't ask me why. For some reason, there actually was a Cuban community in Denver, believe it or not. But yeah, but beyond that, as a kid in Denver till I was 10, in Tampa for kind of the formative years there, from 10 till about through college, and a little bit of my career, and then at companies like Chubb Insurance for moved to St. Louis, then came to GE. That's my first time in Atlanta, then moved out to Kansas City, and frankly, had a chance to come back to Atlanta. And this is, of course, at this time with my own new family here, of course, with my wife and kids. And it was really, Atlanta here was a career move to become executive at Equifax. And we loved Atlanta from when we were at GE that one time, but that's what's brought us back here to Atlanta. But anyways, yeah, from Havana to the States was great opportunity, as many were taking, back during the freedom flight years. But Atlanta was a great career move and great personal move, because the time that we came to Atlanta, we wanted to find a place where we could ultimately kind of settle in and raise our kids, through high school and so forth. And that's why we're here.
So were you born in 1968?
Or no, I was born in 70. So born 70, in 70. Okay. Yeah. So moved, 70. And so then came over when I was in 71. So it was about 11 months. Yeah.
And as you grew up.
Gen Xer, by the way. So good, proud Gen Xer.
Gen Xer, there you go.
Because we don't, it's just Gen Xers. We don't brag about being Gen Xers, but maybe we need to start, because every other generation's bragging about we're the whatever. So we need to start doing some Gen X, cheers,
promotion.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, so between the times you were growing up in Denver and Tampa, were you guys going back to Cuba, not at all.
Not for me. I've never been back there. My and I came up, by the way. So
Never in your life?
never in my life,
Wow.
and just to kind of give context, when I came over, it was my mom, my grandmother and grandfather, who've since passed many years ago, um, and but it was just my mother. So I never met my father. Never met my father. Back in so it's kind of an interesting dynamic in
Wow.
terms of me
Yeah.
growing up. But uh, but yeah, I've never been back. My mom went back. That's what brought us to, when we were in Denver, to Tampa, was there's opportunity. Now this would be like early 80s for her to go back to get my uncle, her older brother. And so she had to go back. So I was left with a family by myself for, I don't know, it felt like at least a month,
Mm.
in Tampa. Well, when I was like 10 or 11 years old, well, she went back. But I've been fearful of going back. I mean, even though I'm a US citizen and
Mm-hmm.
have the passport and everything, there's still something,
Yeah.
and I have my kids now who actually, especially my oldest son in particular, was saying, hey, we should go. And, now there's different access points to get. And I said, you know what, I'm not ready yet. And it's all to do about not trusting you know, leaving the country when it's the right time to leave. But I'm sure I'll get back at some point. So we'll see.
Yeah.
I have a
Wow.
feeling my kids will get there before me.
Yeah, actually probably so,
Yeah.
especially with how portable young people are today and how easy they travel the world.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
wow, that's amazing. So did you communicate with your dad throughout, or not at
No,
all?
no, I
Never.
couldn't even
Okay.
tell you
Okay.
much, and it's funny because and of course now we have therapy with Jeff here, but no, but here's, but it's fun. I mean, I honestly, it didn't come up. It's something that was not talked too much. So obviously, for whatever the situation was, I'm they separated, whatever. So it just never came up. That I grew up not knowing any better to not to even like miss
Yeah.
or ask about it.
No,
Now,
I get that.
as a father, it's like now it's like, then now it's extreme. How could it be very visible, very obvious and all that? But yeah, it's funny. I think as I grew up, you just almost don't know to ask about it
Right.
because you didn't even have a basis to do it other than other people with their
Hmm.
dads. And for me, I don't know, it just seemed like a little disconnect or a bucket or whatever. Yeah.
It does seem like, though, you had a family structure around you that was providing you support and so forth. So
Yeah, I did. And look, I mean, I clearly growing up, because all those years growing up and then not growing, and did not grow up in any form of wealth whatsoever, and whatever. And I would say that particularly when we moved to Tampa and those kind of preteen years and all that, definitely in a sense of independence pretty early. I had a mom who had to work a couple jobs and all that, and not to get too deep into it, but a lot of strained relationships that came when you have stepfathers come in and all that. And so it's part of that, you take that and use that as an excuse to, my life sucks, or you
Mhm.
use that as a platform to just kind of, how do I kind of build from within and build to what I want. And that's how, I guess, what it is. I always tell people there's an element of ignorance, of sometimes not realizing how unfortunate I was. And I shouldn't say that in quote, because it's truly unfortunate in some cases, but sometimes there was maybe some ignorance I had where it's like, "Yeah, this kind of sucks." But, it was really, to me, always a platform of how do you build out.
Yeah.
But I will
Right.
tell you, since then, I did realize that there was always an element of desire to be kind of like everyone else in terms of trying to, family structure or perception. So they always would try to give this little bit of perception to the world that, yeah, everything's just normal, just like you, whoever I'm going to relating with. But I think now, as I, many years later, with a lot more confidence, now I go back and go, it was interesting that that was a mechanism I used probably
Mhm.
to protect myself. But it's important for people to know it's okay to be who you are, and okay to talk about who you were, no matter where you're at.
Yeah, but you probably, yeah, you put up sometimes walls or armor
Yeah.
in situations to,
You may not even realize you're doing it.
yeah,
And you
right.
may not even realize you're doing it. So I'm convinced that if I realized I was doing it, I don't know if I'd be able to get through certain parts of my childhood. Um, or through building or the adversity of trying to pay through yourself to get through college and all that stuff. A lot of things, a lot of grit that got built.
Yeah, exactly.
So sometimes you wonder if the armor wasn't there, would that have occurred? I don't know. So
Did as you grew up, what kind of kid were you? Were you because of your upbringing, were you like, I'm following the rules and I'm getting A pluses, or were you rebelling a little bit? How were those early years?
yeah, it's funny. I would say I'd follow not rebelling in terms of getting into trouble. That definitely wasn't it, but perhaps rebelling in terms of not fitting any sort of mold. And so, yeah, I was like, when I got into high school and all that, I was Mr. Overachiever, senior class president, president of like
Okay.
4 other clubs, all that stuff. Just, and maybe that's perhaps where a little bit of the workaholicness came, during that. And again, who knows? It's like anything else. You dive into it to kind of build. But yeah, so I would say from that
What can I ask
perspective,
though? Was
yeah,
that expected of you
nah,
with the family? No,
not at all.
you just, because I know you today, and I know that it makes perfect sense that you were overachieving in your
Yeah.
high school and years, but sometimes that can come from just an internal
Yeah,
pulse on that, or pressure from the outside.
all internal. Definitely from my mom's perspective, it was definitely immigrant family, just trying to get by week to week. Sometimes moving apartments just because you can't afford one to the next. So from the family perspective, it was about survival almost. So, and then almost, and this is one thing that, as I see with sometimes with people that had similar backgrounds or circumstances, you realize that families don't even know what to know or what to expect or what to
Mm-hmm.
coach their kids. I mean, man, if I knew the stuff now about, how the capabilities to help get kids into school. And I'm thinking, oh man, if I knew what I knew now when I was then, and I'm like, I would have been like stacking up scholarships left and right. Cause I mean, there is so much available, but I didn't know. So we didn't even know what to know. And I don't even think I even talked to my mom that much about the different things I was doing in school or the clubs or whatever. I just had that window, I was gone and I came back late, maybe would have a part-time job or whatever. But we
Mm-hmm.
probably talked more about the job than I did about the school stuff. That was like my thing. And it wasn't that it was a expectation of you better not do it or anything like that. It's just I don't think they even knew what to expect. So I did it. It was what I did at schools.
Right.
And I'll
And
give an
and did you?
example. An
Yeah, go
example
ahead.
was when I got into college. And of course, I had dreams of going to MIT and stuff, which was just way out of, at least my expectation was it was way out of realm from financial in particular. But I at the time received a scholarship to the local community college because of whatever the grades, whatever it was. It said, hey, go to the junior college, which is much more in the norm for someone in my background, the school I went to go to. And it was full, free for 2 years. And I remember I was so insistent that that's the only time there was like friction, because I was like, no, you went to University of South Florida. For me, that was like, that's the 4-year school. That's like, and it was just like this thing. I worked so hard during high school. That's where I want to go. And I got in. Now, look, I mounted up debt and all that stuff to be able to do it. But that was probably the only time where it was a little bit of, what are you doing? And but for me, it was more of an expectation of, no, this is a building block, what I want to do. And there's nothing wrong with community college. There's nothing wrong with that at all.
Yeah.
But for me, it was the stretch I had to do to get myself completely uncomfortable.
So you went to South Florida,
Yeah. Yeah.
USF.
Yeah.
You probably don't know this, but I went to UNC Charlotte, and we were in the same conference as South Florida, and we played them in tennis every year.
Ah.
Yeah.
I
Back in
remember
the day.
hearing about it, Jeff Hilimire. Well,
Oh,
this,
yeah, sure.
so, my alumni newsletters that kept beating
Right.
USF or something.
Right. Right. Um,
And UNC
so
Charlotte, I think, somewhat similar to USF in terms of pretty decent sized school, kind of,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
kind of near city center in SK Tampa or Charlotte. So I think there's a lot of similar personalities to it.
Yeah, I think that's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
So when you went to South Florida, you had jobs, like you were working
Oh,
part-time jobs and
yeah.
everything.
Yeah. Yeah. And actually, I will tell you, one of the things that really helped me was coming out of high school. I was approached to do this program called Inroads, internship program for minority students. And I was so oblivious to it. I'm like, well, why am I eligible? I just didn't even understand,
Right.
why I was eligible for it. And almost hesitant because I really I didn't understand what it was about. But oh yeah, so I took. But very fortunate I took this program as one of those kind of trajectory changing opportunities, and it gave me 4 summers of internships. Yeah, four summers of internships, and I worked for a bank called Barnett Bank, which is I'm sure part of Bank of America now, like every other
Hmm.
bank at the time. And so 4 summers of that, but they also gave me the opportunity to do part-time work. And by the way, then every Saturday morning from 8 a.m. till noon, we would be in training with Inroads and everything on how to eat properly, in a formal, how to dress for success. So it actually, when I look back at it, that's pretty important because those are the sort of things that accelerate your career early in a corporate environment. But they also gave me a chance to be like do part-time work. So a lot of time I would work, fortunately, you think about it, instead of working fast food and all that, I was as a teller half the time
Yeah. Right.
at a bank, which is pretty cool. But yeah, but it definitely was working but yeah, but still trying to get involved in organizations and school and all that type of stuff.
Did you actually, before I ask this question, how would you describe what you do today?
Hmm.
From like, I'm trying to go, I want to then circle back to what you studied in school and if it
Hmm.
matched up. So, yeah, why don't
Yeah.
we jump into like, what are you doing today? And did it match up to at all what you studied in school? Like, did you know what you wanted to be? Certainly you didn't know you'd end up exactly where you are, but
Yeah, I mean, definitely know where. Yeah, actually, I'll tell you in a minute where I thought there was going to go. But I would say, and let me kind of take organizations and companies aside, because at its core, it's really to help people and companies to transform, drive change, be innovative, and inspire others to do the same. And that's and I arrived to that point several years back. Definitely, because I realized when I was in corporate, in this case, when I was in Equifax environment, that was kind of my thing. I never liked the kind of just the maintenance role. It's about, how do we get into, even when I ran a business unit, it was how do we get into business units with unlikely odds in a declining market, and how do we do something with it? And so even when I, with work with the Metro Atlanta Chamber, it's very similar. And how do we kind of make Atlanta a destination where people and companies can do that? So that's
right.
kind of the core. So if I go back to college, no way I would have. I mean, I don't even think the term innovation was, customer
Sure.
experience was definitely not even used back then. But innovation definitely was not used. I have a finance degree,
Okay.
bachelor's in finance. Um, and I thought I was going to be, I think originally a broker, because as you know, in around that time or several years prior to that, so going into college,
Sure.
the movie, do you know where I'm going to go with this? Wall Street.
Yeah, I was gonna say,
Yeah,
yeah.
exactly. Wall Street
Right.
was the movie. And I'm
Gordon.
like, oh yeah. I'm like, oh yeah, that's so cool. It's like, we're going to make, and so I got a finance degree, and which, if I look back, it probably wasn't, but as you know, the bachelor's degree, and depending on your field, is almost not as, in some cases, not as relevant, right? I mean, I'm glad I did it because it kind of gave a financial structure. But yeah, so what I do now, is it connected to what I studied? I don't know. I guess so, because at the end of the day, if you don't grow companies and you're not strategic, and finance is a very strategic degree. I mean, that's what I do like about it. It's really about strategic use of capital. And at the end of the day, innovation has to tie back to that. So that's
Right.
kind of a lot of my premise even now. It's like, yeah, I'm all about being disruptive and creative and trying not to look the part. And so you can try to change behavior. But how you want to make capital behave and how you invest, ultimately it comes to that, back to that. And if you don't understand that piece, so I would make a stretch and say, so yeah, what I do now is tied to my degree. I'm
Yeah.
just not using that present value of, and capital structure, analysis or anything like that in my day-to-day work.
Gotcha. But so I'm trying to take the younger Alex Gonzalez that was certainly working hard to succeed, but I would also say, following
Mm-hmm.
rules, right? I mean, you
Yeah.
were stacking things up, you were doing the right things. But I would say the Alex that I know today is very much knows the rules, but
Yeah.
also pushes yourself, the companies you're with, the
Yeah.
influence on others to disrupt more and to break those rules or to look around them, right? And one of the things that you and I talk a lot about is
Yep.
your background in corporate, my background in entrepreneurship, but yet I feel like you're a leader that leads like an entrepreneur, and now you've started things, so now you actually are an entrepreneur.
Yeah.
But how do you think that evolution came, where you're almost more comfortable now with disruption than rule following? But it sounds like you were a pretty strict rule follower in the beginning.
Yeah. Although what I would say though, if I look back of it, I think that, yeah, I followed the rules in the sense of not getting into trouble from a, obviously obvious getting fired perspective for just something that's blatant. But I would say that if you think about a corporate environment, where 80% of the has to be kind of in the norm, from a
Hmm.
that's generally how corporations work, right? And everybody knows a performance curve, 80%, are kind of doing what they do, 10% not doing, as well, and you do something with them. Then you have this 10 to 20% that outperform. I would argue there's an element of, to outperform, you have to be able to look around rules, bend rules, push boundaries.
Hmm.
And so I would say I was, without knowing it, I was always doing that. I'm able to be a lot more confident about it now and actually speak to it, because I think a lot of people in particularly large organizations look at that and go, well, yeah, but if I take this risk, because that's what it comes down to, taking career risk. I'm going to go for this account and no one's ever gotten it before. I'm going to bank I'm going to do this X, Y, Z, whatever it is that you're doing. That's, there's an element of pushing boundaries versus following the formula and always following a best practice that someone else said that you may not be the right person for. So I think it was always there. It's interesting when you think about it. It was just because I guess just argue outperformance is an element of trying to bend and break some rules, and
Hmm.
companies need some of that. So I would say that's where that connectivity is. But I do remember during when I was at GE, I had a boss I had there, and GE, of course, at the time, this was at their peak of leadership development and all that, and he made a comment to me. He said, "Look, if you really want to succeed and you really want to do well, you have to put yourself in a position where what you do is either going to get you promoted or it's going to get you fired."
Hmm. Yeah, there you
And
go.
and that to me is the difference between people in corporations that, you know, outperform. And by the way, when they don't perform, they tend to be picked up.
Yeah.
And because they're like, wow, I really like how they're approaching it. May have not worked out this time, but I like the gumption, I like the grit, I like the whatever, how they're doing it.
Yeah.
And some companies are not designed for that, sometimes they're not. But if you think about that, and either do something that's going to get me fired or promoted, that's not that different from elements of really successful entrepreneurs who put themselves on the line of, my business is either going to do really well or it's going to fail.
Yeah, 100%. And that strikes me. So how old were you when you sort of were taught that lesson?
This would have been probably, it has to be somewhere in my probably 30s.
Yeah. Yeah, that I mean
Yeah,
that's
sometime in my 30s, because I was running a job that I was way too young to be in. I mean, I was like running a
right.
operations or Six Sigma group or something like that. That I had no idea. I look back, I was always in roles that I'm like, in a quiet moment, to be like, how in the world am I in this job? And
Yeah.
am I really qualified for this job? But yeah, that's when we said that, I realized that this is why I'm in it, because it's that personal risk. But yeah, no,
Yeah.
and that's kind of been the foundation forever. And you always have to, and even checking, even when you're not working for a corporation, you always have to check yourself if you're doing that. If not,
Yeah.
to me, you're just standing still if you're not.
That's right. But I think so many people fall into that trap. So it is interesting that like your your push to succeed and over succeed, married with this idea of taking risks or calculated risks that will propel you, your team, your company forward, or to the point get you fired. um, that makes sense to me, the person that I know today.
Yeah,
And that's not normal, I don't think. I feel like in corporate a lot of times I've heard leaders tell their team, you know it's almost like like, let's not mess up the thing that's working.
right,
Let's do it a little bit better.
right,
We'll get a little bit more budget next year, we'll all get a little bit of a promotion. But like the risk taking, it's almost like, well, I'm going to take the risk, and then I don't benefit really, the company benefits, or I lose my job. And so it's this, whereas if you're an entrepreneur, it literally is, you have to innovate, you have to move your company forward, or the business goes away. So it's easier for an entrepreneur to be there. But I love that you got that from GE, which is like,
Oh yeah, well, and there was a time, and people kind of sometimes ding on, when Welch brought in this whole meritocracy culture to GE. So I was there at the time. I came in when Jack Welch was still there, and I spent many years when Jeff Immelt was there, and which, by the way, those shaped the culture. But there was this meritocracy culture, and and at the heart of it, and it's interesting. After I left GE, I didn't realize how many companies don't do this, particularly larger scale companies. Everybody get really focused. Well, the bottom 10%, which is never that mathematical, is never really
yeah,
that mathematical. I mean, got eliminated or whatever. It usually wasn't exactly like that. It's a whole different discussion. But it was that, like, but man, if you were in that top 10%, you got, stock options and disproportionate bonus and merit. And I'm like, why wouldn't you want to be
hmm,
there?
yeah,
But to be there, you got to do something to get you there. And that's where I think people fail. And then so many discussions. And as a manager or leader, it's like, people, it's like, I'm doing the job, but I'm getting my target. I'm like, but I'm doing my job. Why aren't I getting this? I'm like, well, those are those people who take that risk.
yeah,
And people
right,
who, and so that's where I got that. And as we talk about entrepreneurism, I think that were similarities there to,
hmm,
and I get it. There's a lot of mechanical, a lot of different stuff, but yeah, man, that was like, and, and I guess it's competitive drive comes in, like, I'm going to be number one, and,
yeah,
all that, you get
exactly,
into that. I'm like, but you have to also make sure in a large organization do that where it's healthy as well too, because you
hmm,
could also don't want a lot of people who are trying to get there at the cost of everybody else, because it
that's right,
has to be symbiotic. And by the way, um, as I talk to people, particularly about organizational success, I talk about it's okay to also, you need to make a decision of where you want to be.
yeah,
And it's okay to be like, I want to be the best X, and I want to do my job and do it well, and not take the risk or not go into management, and I'm going to get my time, I'm going to get rewarded. And so I think that's okay. But this area, and
hmm,
just not to keep going on with this, but remember, the other thing, that when I was GE, so another person, this was a colleague of mine who, there's a bunch of management team, and we're in India, and our management team went to India for a week, and they had a huge operation there and all this type of stuff. And we're over here on the shuttle looking outside, and far away from our families, and both of us had moved a few times with the company. And and I remember, this is when I was in Kansas City, and I had neighbors telling me, you must be crazy, how can you leave your hometown? Which I'm like, well, I don't really have a hometown. I mean, anyway, hometown is where I'm at. And this guy turned to me and he said, because I told him, so people think I'm just nuts for doing this, and he said, well, then he looked at me and said, well, we are.
hmm,
But we're the 5% that are crazy enough to be on this journey of just flying around and taking risks and taking our families with us. But look where we're at, and this should be the foundation for success. So
Yeah.
then I realized not everybody thinks the same way. And as I even tell my kids now, I mean, that element of performance and grit and driving, that it's special to have it. So you want to kind of grab onto it and do something with it.
Yeah. I love that. And part of what I think about with my children is, I would love for them to have that entrepreneurial spirit, and certainly not pushing them to be entrepreneurs, but as long as they have what you just described,
Yeah.
I think yes, hopefully they'll be more successful. But I also think there's a happiness that comes with that. There's a satisfaction that comes with that because you feel like you're actually trying to make a difference versus, as you know, so many people get into their jobs and they consider it to be just a job, and it's like, well,
Yeah.
that's the crappy thing I do 8 to 10 hours a day,
That's,
and then the
yeah.
rest of my life is my real life. But if you can make your job exciting and interesting and engaging, your whole life is better.
And put yourself to giving yourself options too. So if you're in a situation where, you don't like your job, how do you get yourself out? And look, it's easier said than done in certain circumstances. So I definitely don't want to make it seem like it is, but man, and again, this is where sometimes I think being so oblivious where,
Hmm.
I think when I left Chubb to go to GE and it was a big career. I mean, I think there would have been, and think about it, as Gen Xers, you're coming from, boomers and others you kind of had this, you stay at one, where you actually, is it the silent generation who are our parents, I guess? Yeah. So, they're the ones who would stay at a company for
That's right.
40, 50 years. So even moving companies after 4 or 5 years, it's like, was just unheard of. Um, and it's still okay. And it's still okay. And there's ways to be innovative and disruptive. You still need to figure out how to move forward. It's just, to me, the magnitude of what that means
Hmm.
for you. And look, change leaders, because as you know, we both speak a lot to change leaders. And as I've coached many people, many executives on this before, that if you are that personality, what was great about GE at that time was that they cultivated that because you were ready to go on to the next gig, and they needed a different perspective at networks or NBC. They needed a different perspective of aircraft. But I do tell people, some people are just not designed to be at a company forever.
Hmm.
And that sometimes they need you for a particular period of time to drive sustainable change, making sure that it's sustainable, not just, a show. And then it's okay to move on. It's okay to
Yeah,
move on.
that's right. Yep. Yep. Um, Speaking of moving on, you went then from GE directly to Equifax. Was that the move?
Yeah, yeah. So the GE in a whole bunch of roles. I had to do the typical GE rotation where I went in
Yep.
as in Atlanta running, doing account management and developing a region, business development, something that I'm sure was not qualified to do. And then got promoted into this Six Sigma thing, which I remember being resistant, but that's what brought me to Kansas City, and was the best
Mm.
thing I ever did in my life because it kind of put me on a special track within GE and gave me a whole different vocabulary and premise of
Pa-
thinking that I
Pause
have
there for
today.
a second.
Yeah.
Pause there for a second because Six Sigma, uh, high level explain what it is, but
Yep.
what I'm more interested in is obviously having that on your resume and
Yep.
being part of that network is helpful in a career.
Yeah.
I'd love to hear, did it actually help you? Does it help you today, that the things you learned through that process? But
So
again,
yeah, so
start with
Six
what it
Sigma
is.
is for um, is really a methodology to drive continuous process improvement with the objective of getting to be as zero defect free as you can. So Six Sigma is, I forgot, I should know, 99.xxx%,
Hmm.
of error free. But, so what I will tell you that in terms of career, it was great because Six Sigma was bigger than just a methodology at GE at the time. It was their kind of language, it was
Hmm.
career platform. It was, so it really just changed trajectory because it allowed me to go from this, what at the time was an insurance guy, to a kind of really more management GE person, to be able to be multidiscipline, multi-business, and kind of gave me that language. I still use it today. I don't use Six Sigma methodology today, but some fundamentals like,
Yeah.
you know, fundamental Six Sigma is, what is your measurement system and is it reliable? I mean, so think about all the discussions that occur in many things today. It's like, that's
Sure.
important. Uh, a simple fundamental thing that's for innovation and customer experience is the whole concept of critical to quality, CTQ. How do you measure from the perspective of a customer? that is just a fundamental. And we see that happen a lot, particularly in the technology space where we measure to what we want versus what the customer wants. So
Mm-hmm.
there's absolutely a lot of things to do. And look, you know me, I'm the most nonlinear person in the world, and Six Sigma's most linear thing. But I think that's also one of the reasons why they put me in that role, because when they put me in that role, at one point I had like 80 Six Sigma people reporting to me, master black belts, statisticians. But the focus was, how do we apply Six Sigma to growth? How do we apply it to actuarial? How do we apply it to marketing
Mm-hmm.
to really drive disruption in those functions so we could rethink how to do it? And so in a weird way, my Six Sigma role was not your typical engineering operational role. It was, how do we use Six Sigma as a disruptor and as an innovation platform instead?
Yeah, right. And the having that framework probably helped you think differently and push more bounds. And yeah, it's interesting how some of that probably, to your point, sticks with you today, even though you're not really following that direct process.
Yeah.
When you got to Equifax, the role you had at the end was Chief Innovation Officer,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
What roles did you have in between? That wasn't what
Yeah.
you were hired for, was it?
Right. No, the two major roles there, part of that. So when I came in, CEO who I knew from GE, who came in, CEO at the time, brought me in. He says, "I want you to help us be a contemporary growth organization." I'm like, so whatever that means. So it's again one of my many times throughout my career where I built the role from scratch. I think I've only
Right.
had two roles, one role. Well, it's again in my early career, but kind of later in my career, maybe one role that actually was already designed for the way it was, which is running a business unit. But it was, so we came into this role leading strategic marketing, brand new
Mm-hmm.
organization. And really what it was for Equifax was building kind of strategic growth pillars. So in other words, and you know this because you work in the marketing space, making sure our marketing was not just about Marcom, but it was also about pricing and strategy and brand and all that. So I built up, and the brand function, the pricing function, the strategy function, and a big part of the job is driving strategy. So building a long-term, 3-year growth strategy with also, and it wasn't just the strategy itself, but the platform for the strategy that still lives today, even with different management. So yeah, so that was a big part of that. I spent 4 years doing that, and a lot of building innovation platforms, for short-term, medium-term, long-term innovation within the company. And then the other role after that was actually running a business unit. So I had a chance to run a business unit, and I've run markets and stuff before, but this was a chance being a president of a unit that reported into Wall Street. So which was, to me, I remember I was almost resistant to it because I convinced myself, no, my role is on this functional side and I'm going to help, GMs. And thank God I did that though, because sitting in that seat and understanding the pressures that quarterly reporting and dealing with analysts and dealing with all the pressures you have to deliver numbers on a quarterly basis in a public company shapes me today and how I think about helping those same people do their job, but be innovative
Sure.
about it. But yeah.
And then, was it your idea, the innovation role, the chief innovation
Yeah,
officer?
yeah. So it was, to be honest with you, it was something that I approached them with because, we built this innovation platform, and then I did this stuff, which, the role I did running this commercial unit, there was a lot of opportunities to engage with startups. And actually when I was running commercial was the first chance because I was in a segment that was stale, not because the whole market was stale. They had a monopolistic competitor, not a monopolistic, but a very dominant competitor there. Market, was slowing down, but that opened a lot of entrance into that market. So I was out in the valley before I knew how the beauty of Atlanta's startup ecosystem. So I was constantly traveling, meeting with startups, and that kind of got me going and realized that there's a second generation to our innovation. We've kind of figured out our internal innovation. And so for a couple reasons, one, I was actually at that point ready to potentially, I had to make a decision. Do I want to be in corporate for the next 10, 15 years? Or do I want to do something independent, start working with a lot of different companies? And so I was kind of getting ready to do that. But then I remembered thinking, you know what, we need to, leadership team was talking to me at Equifax, they said, look, we need to kind of start laying the platforms for the next generation of innovation at the company, particularly externally driven with startups and all that. And that's where I came in with that role. And so, yeah, I designed that role, created it. A lot of it focused on our U.S. businesses in particular, getting us closer to the startup ecosystem, getting us connecting the dots across, a lot of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So you constantly got to be reinventing how you think about innovation in the company. So despite all the foundations we did, in this case would have been 7 or 8 years prior, there was a whole nother layer we got to do. But then after that, I realized I want to work with a whole bunch of different companies, and I also really want to develop this practice and science and art of innovation in a different level, because it made me realize too, no one's got this figured out.
That's right.
And so I wanted to, kind of full-time help the world figure it out, including myself.
Yeah. And that probably started opening your mind more and more to all the things you're involved in now.
Yeah.
I want you to talk for a second about, the different facets of what you're doing today with the Chamber, Disruptor Studio, and the evolution of all of that.
Yeah, so kind of good take it linearly from, left, and I spent actually that summer, because, even talked back then, even thinking, okay, I know I want to kind of build thought leadership around this. And I had this great idea of writing a book, which it's no 5-day turnaround by Jeff Hilimire, but I think I didn't do it back then because, there's this decompression when you particularly, and I tell people who kind of leave corporate, or even if it's interim or not, you got to decompress a little bit, because a lot in terms of open your mind a little. As much as I was kind of more the person to do that within the company, I had to open up. I looked at all different models, agencies and all that. Then I found myself, instead of consulting, really doing a lot of coaching, started this thing called Highwire Group and all that. But instead of and I didn't want to just consult innovation, because a lot of people are doing the process, but I found myself that the conversation I was having with C-level executives around innovation ended up being about them. About how do they drive change? How do they convince their CEO? How do they kind of drive stakeholder buy-in? Which, by the way, going back to my Six Sigma days, a big chunk of that Six Sigma methodology at GE was about change acceleration management. So that was disproportionately the amount of work as a leader in Six Sigma at GE you did was really about change management, which today I use extensively as well. So I forgot to mention that. But when I looked at that, so much of this innovation thing came down to 1 or 2 leaders in a company having that, grit and ability to drive change and taking the risk. That's what led me down this journey. Wow, this innovation thing, there's a lot of people putting a lot of good process, and I put a lot of process around innovation in the company. This is really about the person, the people that drive it. And that's where, wanted to start exploring that. So Disruptor Studios was born, where we get to interview. So we've interviewed great leaders. And what I wanted to do with that was also show it's not always your typical leader that's driving innovation and disruption. But there's just a fundamental innovator's DNA, an X factor in people, whether they're a chef like Ford Fry, or, heads up a sports team like Darren Eales, or an incredibly motivational person like Kat Cole, and I could go on and on and on. And it started that journey, that started the platform and of thought leadership, which is now leading to what hopefully will be a book to come out soon, really focusing on that innovator's DNA. Then at the same time, this great intersection came in with a woman that we both know, Hale Modelbog, at the Metro Atlanta Chamber. We were talking, and I really rediscovered Atlanta at that point too.
Yeah.
And I realized, oh man, this place is just so uniquely positioned to be like an innovation hub for the world.
Yeah.
And I said this before I even, actually was getting paid to say that. But, and I realized that, we have this unique startup culture, corporate innovation culture like no one else, creative culture that people really don't know about, university systems, and the people here, and this kind of just culture of to-do, and there's so much. And there's an opportunity with the diversity of people, diversity of companies. And I remember being in Hala's office at the time, her conference room actually, and I was a board member of the Metro Atlanta Chamber, and we were kind of talking through about all the stuff, and I was kind of going through this whole kind of brand ecosystem, this, that, and all that, going left and right. She says, well, why aren't you doing it for us? I'm like, I don't know, because I don't do this stuff for other, I just kind of gave a very, entrepreneurial flippant response, or that don't work for people, And then I realized, man, what a platform to help,
Mm-hmm.
shape it. And I never in my life thought it would work for what it was a chamber. Then I realized this Metro Atlanta chamber is like no other.
Yeah.
And it really is purposeful. And and then when I got into this role of chief innovation officer, I was able, it's beautiful because it really supported what I do concurrent. So being able to tell stories of people like through the Disruptor Studio or podcasts like this, or writing thought leadership pieces, it worked very well together with what I
Yeah.
do at the chamber, which is to one, connect this ecosystem and tell stories about it. And
Mm-hmm.
so, yeah, so it's very rare you get something so symbiotic come together. And so it's pretty cool.
Yeah.
And by the way, it opened me up to meet people that I've, you think you know everybody until you realize you don't know anybody.
Mm.
And I think that applies to anybody, anywhere. This definitely has been a great platform to do that as well too.
Yeah, and what, since you obviously during Hala's tenure at the chamber, um, I've seen it continue to evolve, and it is like no other. I mean, at least people's expectation of what a chamber of commerce is. Anytime I tell someone I'm, on the board of advisors, I think they think it's, the classic
Yeah.
chamber networking event, where you're just passing
Switch
business
cards.
cards.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, but no, it's very purposeful, and I love the direction of it. And I
Which is a
love that they
testament to our business community. I mean, you have
totally.
CEOs. I mean, when I remember going into an executive committee or board meeting, and you're looking around, man, it's like you got
Yeah,
the decision makers of the
yeah,
biggest companies in the world right
that's
next
right.
to, folks from our civic organizations and foundations and sports teams. And the ability, and I always talk about, to drive innovation, the ability to drive what I call collisions. But it really is about the collaboration in a unique way is so essential. And it has to happen
Yeah,
within a company, right? So you got to have finance and legal, be able to work with marketing, and you can't ignore that.
yeah,
What's amazing about Atlanta is that when you have a purpose, people will collide, work together, drive things forward. And so it's really kind of a gift of a platform to do that. And at the same time too, people love the idea of having a brand around innovation for the region as well too. So yeah,
yeah.
so it's again very rare that all those things kind of come together with what your personal passion is. So that's what brought me here as well.
Yeah, it does seem like you've been able to cultivate, your corporate job. I'm putting
Yeah,
that in quotes, right? With the
right.
chamber around innovation, you've got Disruptor Studio, which allows you to have conversation and influence people around disruptors and innovation. You've got Highwire, which is consultancy around that. You're
Yeah,
writing the book. We're doing, podcasts and so forth. Um, 10 years from now,
yeah.
what are you doing?
Well, hopefully there'll be a beach involved. But no, I mean, to me,
we can do this podcast from the beach, can't we?
exactly right. And look, 10 years, the element of storytelling is definitely,
Yeah,
at the root of all this stuff, whether it's what I do at the chamber, whether it's what we do at Structure Studio, whatever. And so continuing to build that platform, because I think people are,
hmm,
this is a space that people, because there's a space of how do you innovate at the highest level, right? How do I build a new company? How do I change the direction of a company? There's those very big, how do I shape a region? How do I shape, there's those really big, meaty things from transformation innovation. But then you're going to also go to how do I make myself better?
yeah,
How do I, and I'm not going to be in that top 10%, which you discussed before. I'm not going to be that person who's going to put myself at risk, but I want to be very good at what I do.
yeah,
There's innovation. That's still innovation that requires from within to do that. And so for me, it's continuing to be a storyteller and convener and advisor to help people and organizations do that. Whatever that looks like in 10 years, I think that's great. I think there is a big forum now in terms of kind of a whole nother generation of storytelling. Reason why we're doing this podcast as well, that helps be able to do that. And look, as long as I'm starting to continue to talk to interesting people,
yeah,
whether it's on a stage, whether it's through a medium, whether it's a one-on-one, and that mixture of that, I never want any day to look at like a typical day.
yeah.
And that's where I see myself 10 years. And look, I always talk about confusion tolerance. Some people are like, well, what exactly does that look like? I'm like, I don't know. I
Right.
mean, I have an idea of what some of the levers to
Yeah.
pull, but I think, it just as we continue shaping on that purpose and mission, I think we'll be okay.
Well,
And
I'm
the
looking
beach
forward
involved too.
to. Yeah, there you go. I was going to say I'm looking forward to being some way, shape, or form part of that journey
Absolutely.
along with you. Well, I tell you what, man, I thought I knew you, but this I learned a lot. And there's things that I want to follow up just personally with you. I made a bunch of notes, but anything that I missed that you think people should know?
No, I mean, I think really the driver behind everything is, my beautiful and lovely wife,
Hmm.
who's been who deals with all the craziness and keeps me as grounded as could be. She's, we're very opposite in a very beautiful way in that way, so she's the pragmatist and I'm the, over here like doing stuff. But we haven't talked about that before. She's like, I love you because you're always aspiring and dreaming and all that. And I'm like, I love you because you kind of keep
Yeah.
things real. Um, and then my three kids, have
How old are they?
22, 18, and 15.
Wow.
And
Yeah.
so, yeah, so it's kind of fun because they are like, I tell people, and I may have told you before, they are my ultimate focus group. So, to me, I think part of being innovative is being multi-generational too.
Yeah.
And even though I like to say Gen X is the most dynamic generation, I mean, we are able to connect and we're cool and
Yeah.
all that.
Right.
But it's important to understand what Gen Z's things. So they've been great to, bring them. And so you're talking about the next 10 years is also bringing
Hmm.
my kids
That's right.
into whatever that means. It's not even about running a business, but just bringing closer to what I do every day. And that's what's been great about Disruptor Studio. And even when the stuff we do for the region, getting them closer to it because that's fun too, as we start shaping lives that'll, definitely outlast us. And that's pretty cool.
No doubt. No doubt. Well, thanks for sharing so much with me today.
Well, thank you, Jeff. I can't wait to ask you the hard hitting questions, but
All right. I'm ready.
all right, Jeff.
All right. Thanks, Alex.
See you.